when we started Enterhealth, people were not looking at addiction as even a medical disease, much less a brain disease. They looked at people that had addiction as sinners. It was a moral problem. It was a moral weakness, and obviously could not be farther from the truth. So when we started to talk about addiction as just a medical disease, that was heretical.
With this podcast, what we're trying to do is have real, authentic discourse. Dr. Urschel, it's great to have you here today.
Thanks, Dave. Really, really a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely.
I've been looking forward to this.
I have too. This is, as you know, this is Enterhealth's podcast we launched this year, Treatment Redefined. And one of our objectives is to have honest, thought-provoking conversations around the treatment and addiction field.
Right.
And having thought leaders from various disciplines is going to be a really important part of that.
Right.
And with you being here, I think this brings a real relevance to Enterhealth today because you're one of our co-founders.
Right. This is very exciting that we're doing podcasts, and we're kind of coming into the whole social media age and trying to convey this information in a different medium to everybody. 'Cause people kind of consume information in different ways these days, and so I think this is really important.
Absolutely. So let's just for the sake of this, as we get going, we're going to spend today talking quite a bit about a hot topic: cannabis, marijuana use. Is it good? Is it bad? Lots of discussion around this. I hear it everywhere I go, from my kids to colleagues to the patients we serve.
Right.
So we're going to spend a lot of time on that, but just taking a little trip down memory lane, we've known each other nearly 2 decades, haven't we?
Right. It's gone really fast.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking about this just the other day, knowing we were going to be spending some time together, that, nothing happens just by chance. I think this is a real blessing that we were able to meet each other. We met back in, I believe, right around 2007.
Right.
Early
maybe
2006,
2007.
So I was going to say, maybe late 2006.
Right.
And you had been practicing in the addiction world really for quite some time. I describe you as really a pioneer in the field back in the day. Maybe just real quickly, just a little brief background before you and I met.
Right. So as you know, I'm an addiction psychiatrist. I've been practicing in Dallas since 1991, and have tried to get the latest science, latest scientific research out into the field of addiction treatment, addiction and mental health treatment. It just has not been there, and although there is good treatment out there, they're not using all the tools and resources that science is showing to be effective. Mm-hmm. And this is a life-threatening disease, alcohol and drug addiction is. And so I've always tried to do that, and we kind of got to cross paths. Mm-hmm. This is my 4th addiction treatment program I've developed in Dallas-Fort Worth, and this is the longest going. And every time I built one, we learned a lot. Mm-hmm. And then to find great partners like you and your family and our wonderful team at Enterhealth, it's just we've really helped a lot of people.
Yeah, we have.
Very, very, very rewarding.
Well, you come from good stock. I had a chance to meet your father before he passed. Cardiothoracic surgeon at Baylor for many years. Was kind of a legend there. You decided to go into this space. You felt like going into psychiatry and specifically addiction was an area you felt like you could really make an impact.
Right. Yep.
UT Southwestern training?
UT Southwestern, right.
Did you do some training in the depression area too? Didn't you do like a fellowship or something after that?
So I did a fellowship in alcohol and drug addiction research up at University of Pennsylvania.
That's right.
For 2 years. And actually the depression issue comes from one of my mentors at UT Southwestern, a real brilliant professor in depression, world famous, encouraged me to go do that fellowship. Mm-hmm. And in that fellowship is where I kind of learned the secret sauce of all the science that just it was not out in the clinical world. It was all in the research world behind sort of the academic walls and ivory towers. And we wanted to try and put it into every man's treatment program information, because it's not hard to do. And when you inject the right tools into addiction treatment, your outcomes skyrocket.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So being a native Texan myself, grew up in Richardson. Mm-hmm. Families from Texas, Panhandle, West Texas. You're from Dallas, grew up in Highland Park.
Right.
I like to tell people when I meet them that Enterhealth really came from humble beginnings. It wasn't something that we decided to build to necessarily build a business around and grow it and sell it off and let some other group of people try to take it on. It was something that we felt like we could make a difference in our community. Right. And when we set our sights on doing this together, we wanted to bring real treatment to bear. Right. That was very important. And we took a lot of arrows in the back in those early years, bringing things to the market, really to our patients and families that they couldn't get access to elsewhere. Primarily things around addressing like what we call dual diagnosis, which I've learned that term over the years is really just addressing the underlying psychiatric issues that come with substance abuse.
Yes.
Very prevalent.
Right.
I think every patient we've ever served on some spectrum level has had some emotional psychiatric issue that's really fueling the addictive behavior. And then with all of the cravings and how it affects the brain, which we'll get into some today, the use of some of these, anti-addiction medications have proven to be invaluable. And you were at the forefront of a lot of that thinking in the early days. Could you just hit briefly on some of that?
So essentially, backing up just a second to one of the reasons that we jointly worked together for Enterhealth in Dallas is there was a variety of different treatment programs, all of them really 12-step based, and the people would leave Dallas to go to these 12-step based programs around the country. At the time, they were like Betty Ford and Hazelden and Karen, et cetera. And people would go and then come back and then relapse quickly. And not that they're not good programs, but we thought that we could have a better solution for people. And especially when you and your great father, also very prominent here in the business community in Dallas-Fort Worth and really and nationally, felt that we just want to build something great for Dallas-Fort Worth, for our community, so people don't have to leave, so we can get great treatment here. And that's kind of what started us working together. That's
absolutely right. So came from humble beginnings. We opened up a residential program in early 2008, trying to put forward the latest advancements in treatment.
Right.
And over the years, we try to do the same thing. Every time we see something that's really evidence-informed, if you will, evidence-backed, let's integrate it in and let's give every opportunity for our patients and families to be able to get better.
Bring in the best tools out there that science has shown to be effective to help them beat this life-threatening disease. Because if you have dual diagnosis, alcohol and drug addiction, and a psychiatric illness, you have some really major challenges in your life. But if you get the right treatment, and in most cases you get the right treatment, you get better quite quickly, you'll stay better, and you can actually change the trajectory of your life for the rest of your life and for future generations of your family.
That's exactly
So it's really, really important to get the right treatment because this is a devastating illness.
Absolutely.
But very treatable.
Right. Yes,
if you have the right
treatable.
tools.
So let's talk just briefly. Addiction. What is it? You and I have talked over the years. It's brain disease. It's trauma to the brain. Just for the layperson that's out there listening, what is addiction?
Right. Well, I could be, difficult, and I've trained you over the last 20 years and ask you what is addiction. David, you could probably give an even better answer than I am. But since I'm the doctor, I'll give the answer. And that, addiction is actually, if you look at what alcohol and drug addiction is, it's alcohol and drugs are neurotoxins. They're poisons. They injure the brain cells, the brain tissue. And if you continue to repeatedly injure it over a period of time, your brain function starts to go down. And if you keep injuring it, and there's a lot of reasons you might keep injuring it, you don't realize you're doing it, your brain gets offline so much that all of a sudden parts of your brain that should not be in charge become in charge. They start to hijack. The more basic parts of your brain, called the limbic system, hijacks the smart part of your brain, the cortex, and you can go do really dumb things. If you look at it, step back and look, well, why is this person, getting in the car after 3 drinks, after he's already had 3 DWIs? It's because his brain's off. And when you understand, and all the science, there's compelling decades and reams of scientific data showing it's a mild to moderate temporary traumatic brain injury. So that's what addiction is. Alcohol and drug addiction is a mild to moderate temporary traumatic brain injury. You get psychiatric illness because psychiatric illness are merely symptoms of neurotransmitter. From the brain injury, you get neurotransmitter brain chemicals get imbalanced. And so sometimes the imbalances are there in the first place, and then you try and help your depression get better. You try and sleep, and so you take substances, and you use enough substances that you've now entered your brain, and now you have the two diseases, psychiatric and addiction. Which came first? It doesn't really matter. You just need to treat both. But addiction is a brain injury. The fabulous news that science has shown about addiction is if you can stop poisoning yourself, if you can stop the use of the substance, and then ideally if you can get the right nutrition and you get the right exercise and sleep, your brain can heal itself really quite quickly within a matter of a few months, and your brain function can get back to normal.
Oh, that's incredible, because I think kind of in the there's always been this conception out there that once you've injured your brain, it doesn't heal.
Right.
But you emphasize the temporary part. It actually can recover.
Right. Yeah. The fact that God gave us this amazing organ of our brain and so many other organs in our body. You just look at, if you have cancer and it's treatable, it may have injured parts of your body, but your body heals. You break your arm, you set it, your arm heals, it's back to normal function. Same thing with your brain. The healing function of our brain makes Enterhealth look great. All we have to do is give you the tools to help stop the poisoning of your brain and your body, and your body's going to heal itself, and we're going to look good, and you're going to have a great life. But that's harder than it seems. That's tricky, because the part of your brain that's hijacking it, the limbic system, wants to drive you back for no good reason, drive you back to use. And sometimes it's really hard to resist those urges. And so it's not a matter of willpower, it's just a matter of getting the right tools in place.
I agree. It's rather complex in a way, but it's also understandable if you apply the right types of tools, as you say, to the treatment. But you've got to have the right tools on the table in order to combat this correctly. When you talk about the underlying, that kind of compulsive drive or the limbic system, that's where a lot of these important medications have proven to be effective.
Exactly.
And maybe you don't have to be on them for an indefinite period of time, but you need to be on them for a period of time in order to quell those cravings.
Exactly.
So that we can do the other important work, the therapy, working with the family, doing all of the other aspects of our treatment to get you to a point where you can be in sustained recovery.
Exactly. Without question. When we started Enterhealth, people were not looking at addiction as even a medical disease, much less a brain disease. They looked at people that had addiction as sinners. It was a moral problem. It was a moral weakness. And obviously could not be farther from the truth. So when we started to talk about addiction as just a medical disease, that was heretical. People go, what are you talking about? And think of it like this. High blood pressure. High blood pressure by itself is not terrible, but if it left unchecked, you can have a stroke, you can have a heart attack, you can blow out your liver, you can blow out your kidneys, really bad stuff. But if you get the right treatments for high blood pressure for this disease, you can actually get your body back and you can have a great life. The same thing with alcohol and drug addiction. And so with alcohol and drug addiction, you have to stop the poisoning and you have to treat the psychiatric symptoms and kind of reboot the person's brain. And the wonderful thing is in medicine, there's this whole area of medicine called that treats brain injury. You have this traumatic brain injury, you have neurologists and neurosurgeons. People have been treating brain injuries successfully for so long. Basically, Enterhealth is just borrowing those tools, applying them in a much milder and more temporary brain injury, and our patients get better so much faster. But like you say, the medications, the anti-addiction medicines that are non-addicting can really help quiet the limbic system. So the cortex that's in charge of your life and helps you make better decisions can be in charge. That's right.
Well, that's a good segue.
Yes.
Let's jump into cannabis.
Absolutely.
Because we talk about drug and alcohol addiction, and I often hear people refer to pot, marijuana, cannabis as something other than drugs.
Right.
And is it addictive? Can you become addicted to it?
Right.
So maybe I'll just start off with, can you get addicted to cannabis?
Without question. So there's so many aspects to talk about cannabis. We'll get to them, but people don't think that cannabis is dangerous. And therefore, our society, for a variety of reasons we'll discuss, has normalized cannabis. People think it's safe for two main reasons. It's legal and it's natural. And we can even get to that. But the fact is, cannabis, especially at today's potency levels, and we'll talk about what that means, that the cannabis today is incredibly addicting, incredibly injurious or toxic to your brain and many, many organs in your body. And it is very addicting. Let me give you an example. You probably know this. At Enterhealth Ranch, our residential facility, most people with addiction don't need to go inpatient. They usually go outpatient. So 60% of the time, if you have alcohol and drug addiction, you're going to start in outpatient, stay in outpatient. 40% of the time, the disease is so serious that you can't handle staying sober in the outpatient, so you're going to go inpatient. So people going into an inpatient program, residential program like Enterhealth, these are some pretty significantly injured or severe, moderate to severe addiction and psychiatric illness, right? And so 25% of all of our admissions coming in Enterhealth a year are primary marijuana. Now, how could that be true if marijuana is not addicting? But so their use of marijuana injured their body and their brain and their life so much that they couldn't just go into outpatient. First of all, they needed treatment because they got the disease. They didn't go outpatient. They actually go inpatient. And half of the people that were admitted with primary marijuana were psychotic. That means they were hearing voices, they were paranoid, they were delusional, all from the marijuana use because that's how toxic the substance is. People don't understand this. Obviously, one of the reasons we're talking about today on today's podcast, we have to get this information out to the public.
That's right. And one of the things I've learned is that cannabis and marijuana, it's changed over the years.
Yes.
So go back to the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s. The marijuana that people would use back then,
right.
We're talking about a much more potent substance, aren't we, for today's world?
Without question. And so back in the 1960s, that's when, the mid-60s, the Woodstock weed, so to speak, the hippies, 1% to 2% of THC. So weed, marijuana, weed, pot, they're interchangeable words in my conversation today. The THC, there's two chemicals in the plant of cannabis, THC and CBD. Everybody's probably heard of those. And those are the two what we call psychoactive chemicals. Now there's another, there's 250 chemicals. When you smoke marijuana, a joint, when you light it up and smoke, you have about 250 different chemicals going into your body. The two primary ones that we know are brain active, psychologically active, are those two. And the THC is the one that's really destructive. The CBD really, to our knowledge, does not cause brain injury, and to our knowledge, just at least at this point, does not seem to be addicting, which is great. There's some benefits, And so the idea is the more potent, the higher the percentage of THC in weed or in the substance in which you're taking into your body, an edible, you're smoking, you're vaping, you're putting on your skin, whatever, the higher the dose, the higher percentage, the more toxic it is to your brain and all your other body organs. And people were thinking this is 1% to 2% weed, or they get this perception of back then. I mean, even then it was not great for you. But right now, we're looking at 15 to 20% average across the board that you're getting, okay? And when a state legalizes marijuana, whatever the regular marijuana on the street was, let's just say it's 15%, it's immediately bumped up by 20% because the higher the THC content, even though it's more toxic, you also get a much better high. And people are using the marijuana, let's be honest, in most cases because they want to get high.
Right.
And that's their choice. And I just want to say that so people don't feel attacked by this podcast is we're not saying whether you can use marijuana or not. We just want to give you the data so you can make a good decision. This is your life. This is your child's life. This is your spouse's life. As long as you understand the data, you can make better decisions. That's what we're trying to do today, by the way.
That's right. And, when I start having these conversations with, say, young people, they'll often say, well, it's not any worse than alcohol.
Yes.
Is it worse than alcohol?
Well,
is it different in terms of how it affects your body and your brain?
Great question. So number one, it's not either or. Most people that use marijuana are also using alcohol.
Yep.
So we can't kid ourselves that people are only, for the majority of people, they're not just using one or the other. Do some people? Absolutely. A lot of people that drink alcohol and don't smoke weed, but most people that smoke weed will also drink alcohol. Maybe not to excess, but they'll drink alcohol. But if you want to compare the two substances, alcohol can be more acutely injurious to your brain, more toxic in terms of you use it, and if you drink a lot of it really fast, you can get very impaired, obviously. But then you stop drinking, alcohol's gone in 24 hours. Okay, maybe 36 hours. It depends how much you drink. Marijuana, though, when you're using THC, if you just smoke one, the problem with alcohol just gets taken out through your liver and it's gone. THC, when you eat, smoke, however you get the THC in your body, the THC loves fat. Chemically it's called lipophilic, so loves fat, or a fat lover, lipophilic. And so what happens is, instead of just being processed out, you bring it into your body, you get the high, even though the high goes away fairly quickly within a couple hours, or depending on how you use it, it will go into your body and latch onto your fat cells. All of the fat cells that are in your brain, all of your organs. And so what happens is, you smoke a joint, the THC will be in your body for 3 to 7 days. There's this fallacy, let's just say in high school, that you can smoke a joint at a football game on a Friday night and it won't bother your test, your big test that's coming up on Monday. Completely untrue. There's significant problems. First of all, the THC will still be in your body. It will have been in there all the way through the weekend when you were trying to study. It will decrease your memory systems. It will decrease your sleep. It will decrease your ability to focus. And even more importantly, it will decrease your motivation to want to study for the test in the first place and help to distract you. So that's a problem. So if you use it once, it can last in your body up to a week. Not a high. It's just there causing trouble in different organs. And then then if you smoke the next day, you have basically marijuana from the day before, the THC the day before in your body, and you've just added more. And then you smoke the next day, or even if you skip 2 or 3 days. So that's the problem. Marijuana, so I say that it's more toxic than alcohol. It's worse for you than alcohol because it hangs around and injures your body way after the high does. And so it's just a different way to look at, what's dangerous. Neither one is safe. We're not saying that people can't use either substance. We're not saying either substance is bad. That's a judgment call. But there are serious consequences to using marijuana, and people need to know, especially teenagers, because teenage brains are much more susceptible to the really negative toxic effects of THC than an adult brain. That doesn't mean it's safe for an adult brain. Adult brains get hurt quite prominently by THC, but adolescent brains are exponentially worse, and we can talk about why.
Yeah. I've actually just anecdotally noticed over the last probably handful of years, just patients that are coming into our treatment programs at the residential or outpatient, is much, much higher use of cannabis,
right,
and a lot more psychosis.
Right.
It's skyrocketed.
Right.
And what's interesting is there's a public perception out there. It just exists, and I think it's being pushed because there's so much legalization of this across the states,
right,
that it's not as harmful as other things like alcohol or
right,
things that are legal. So I'm curious, when we see a lot of the psychosis, with patients coming in, is that because of the amount of use, or is it because it is also potentially laced with other substances, other things that could be harmful, synthetic substances? What are you kind of seeing that's causing the psychosis, particularly in a lot of the young people? I would say like adolescents, we see young adults, but that population has a lot of psychotic behavior as they're coming in, and we're correlating it to a lot of the cannabis use.
First of all, there's a lot of factors that create the psychosis. It can be genetics. You might have a genetic susceptibility in your brain from just people in your family, et cetera. The other issue is that the higher the dose of the THC, for regular THC, I don't want to really dig down in the weeds, but there's a delta-9 THC. That's the one that comes from the plant, and that is, that's what people think about with THC. There's also a delta 8 and a delta 10, so there's just different chemical formulations that are different, but they're all thought of as THC or marijuana or cannabis. And the problem is that the other two, delta 8 and delta 10, have all these chemicals in them that we don't know what they are. They're chemically made. The delta 8 is made sort of half from the plant and half from pure chemicals, and delta 10 is all chemicals, nothing to do with the plant. Okay. And so that, number one, that those other chemicals can cause the psychosis, but also just the higher dose of the. So why is marijuana, why is THC messing with your brain? Well, it's part of the family. It activates receptors in your brain called cannabinoids. Cannabinoids are all over your brain, and they're very important to our brain's functioning. So what happens is, if you have a lot of these outside, we call them exogenous, or cannabis from the outside of your body coming into your brain, hits these receptors and turbocharges them. And so it's like put this rocket pack on the back of whatever it was supposed to do, and your brain just it gets psychotic because it's not made to. It's made for regular gasoline, and you just put jet fuel in it.
That's right.
Right. And so, hey, that car's not going to work really well, or it's going to go really fast for a while and then peter out. But bottom line is, the psychosis in most cases will get better. At Enterhealth, we have a really good track record of treating that. But sometimes, unfortunately, no matter what we do, you put the THC from either these other toxic chemicals, the high dose of THC, and the genetics, and the person has schizophrenia, permanent schizophrenia the rest of their life. Now that's a real minor, that's a small percentage, maybe 5 to 10% of the psychosis. So that means 90% of the people get better. But when it's your son or daughter or brother or nephew, it can be a real. It's just catastrophic.
Oh, absolutely. And when you have somebody come in and that's, say, primarily alcohol abuse, we will take them through withdrawal stabilization, detox them.
Right.
They get it out of their system and they're feeling better, relatively quickly. When we have patients come in that are having some active psychosis, they're also drinking, like you said, maybe using other drugs, but it takes a lot longer for their mind to settle, doesn't it?
Exactly. It can be 2 to 3, 4 weeks sometimes if you're lucky. So sometimes a few days, but it just takes a while. On top of everything else they're challenged with, because addiction, again, if they're coming in for primary marijuana, they're probably using some other substances. They're probably using quite a bit of alcohol, maybe or maybe not, it depends. But it's not good at any level. And one thing else I wanted, before we skip on to another topic, especially if you're an adolescent or a 20-year-old, when you're smoking this really high dose THC, right? Again, you can get it in edibles. That's where you eat it. You can get it in, using bongs. You can get it in just buying product that's already incredibly potent right out of the store or, on the street. Or you can do a combination of all those. When you have that high a dose and you're using it, like you're starting in your 15, 16 or whatever, 13, 14, 15, 16, and you're using it daily, what happens is during your adolescent, it actually not only gives you these symptoms, it actually changes the neurons, the neuronal pathways of your brain. As your brain matures, the different brain cells that are talking to each other from one side of the brain to the other, they end up having this sort of accelerant put on them by the body called myelin. Myelin kind of really gives you, it's like you had a sort of a dial-up modem for some of our older listeners, and all of a sudden you have a T1 line. You're kind of creating this very important but sophisticated but fragile construction in your brain. And so as you lay down the faster neurons or the faster fibers, you got to remove the old ones. Otherwise, everything gets cluttered, kind of a bird's nest, or the end of a fishing line gets all tangled, et cetera. Yeah. Marijuana, and so the brain has these processes to kind of prune off the old stuff, all the old lines, make way for the new ones. Marijuana stops the pruning. So what happens in these brains that people have been using from early teens on, the pruning stops, and they have this big bird's nest of neurons up there, and so it messes with their IQ, their memory, their insight, their judgment, their sleep, their irritability, their self-confidence, because all these things affect their ability to learn and perform in their life, et cetera. And so it's a real problem, not just for the addiction or whatever, but this is changing the brain. Now, your brain, if you can stop it, your brain can revert, and over time, it can, as the healthy parts of your brain the healthy pruning aspects of your brain will come back online, and it can take off the old lines, and your brain you get smarter, et cetera, over time.
So
but it's a big deal. This is like
a big deal.
Changing your brain maturation from this substance.
Absolutely, for the young people in particular, because their brains are not fully developed until, what, about 26-ish?
28, 20 to 29.
28, 29 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And when you talk about this, inability of your brain doing what its, God-given natural abilities, which is to go in and prune and take away the clutter and allow it to further develop, are these things that they can see with technologies today to be able to prove what you just said, which is, look, if you can look at an active user that's been using for this many years, you can actually see that the brain is a little cluttered in those respects that you're talking about?
Without question. So first of all, everything that I'm talking about today, that we're talking about today, there is scientific data to bring up, to support it. In Enterhealth, we're always trying to find great partners because this is a big field, and we're always looking. So we found one of the people that's done groundbreaking research in just what you talked about is a Dr. Francesca Philby down at the Center for Brain Health here in Dallas at UTD. And that is an amazing organization. As you know, we've just started to partner with on a variety of research fronts.
That's right.
And we're so excited about it. But Dr. Philby's research, which I looked at in one of her lectures 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, has hard data showing that these brains are changed, that the pruning aspects are offline, that she's showing you this is a brain that didn't use marijuana, this is a brain that did, and these are the differences you can see, and she replicated it across multiple different studies, et cetera. And, she has large National Institute of Health grants to continue. This is such groundbreaking work.
I think it's such important
information. It's a real deal. It is a real deal. Nothing to be scared about, but it's something that we want people to use good judgment based on good data.
Absolutely.
And that's the problem. Let's back up for 1 second, because something we forgot to talk about. When a state legalizes marijuana, it's not legalizing it because it's safe. Okay, people do think that marijuana is safe because it's either legal or it's natural. Let's just jump into that conversation for just a second, if that's okay. So let's do the natural one. Because it's natural, it's supposed to be safe. Well, let's just say, poison ivy is natural. Would you want to smoke poison ivy? Can you imagine smoking poison ivy, having all that oil hit your lung? I mean, that's just, it doesn't make any sense. And when something is legalized, that means either a state representatives in their state legislature voted, or most of them are not physicians or have any medical training, or the population, small groups of the population voted. So again, most of them not medical. So the medical community is not voting for this. The FDA, the National Institute of Health, not saying, hey, let's make this legal. This is all commercialization. Okay, whether it's bad or good, it just is. It is what it is, right? And so when a state legalizes it, that is basically, it means it's commercialized. So that means companies are going to come in and try and make a lot of money off it, just like the beer companies, the alcohol companies. Again, they're not bad. It's just, it is what it is. But they're going to have a playbook of how to roll this out, how this substance, and their goal is to make a lot of money for their shareholders. You've seen it at tobacco. The cigarette companies did it for a long time, and then they were actually increasing the potency of nicotine in the cigarettes, making them more addicting. They knew it. They got caught with their hands in the cookie jar, and they got slapped with billions and billions of dollars of lawsuits that they lost, right? Because of that. Well, now the cigarette companies, the tobacco companies, essentially own most of the marijuana companies. And so they own these companies. They bought all the smaller ones kind of and have standardized it, and they're using the same playbook that they used to roll out cigarettes, only there's no government restrictions on the amount of the percentage of THC.
Yeah.
And so their goal is to sell more product. And so let's just use an example. In Colorado, which was, I think it legalized around 2013, 2014, now when a state legalizes it, the goal of the commercial companies is to put as many of the storefronts out there, because the more storefronts are around, more people think it's safe.
That's right.
So, like the statistics for that idea is that in Colorado there's 100 Starbucks and there's 200 McDonald's total in Colorado. Well, there's over 1,000 marijuana stores. Okay, so that's 3 times the combined total of all Starbucks and McDonald's. And to me, it always seems like there's a McDonald's in every corner. I'm not putting down Starbucks or McDonald's. It's just like the more stores you can open, the more access, the more products you'll sell, but the more normal people think that this product is.
That's exactly right.
And that's a complete sham. That's really dangerous to a lot of people in our society.
And, you've been speaking about this actually for several years now, and I mean, you just got back from speaking on our behalf up in Oklahoma, which is another state that's legalized it. And just anecdotally, when you're talking with practitioners or talking with maybe state representatives, people that you've run around with, what are you hearing? I mean, are you hearing the negative effects that have come with this? Like, yes. We have more emergency room visits, we have more traffic accidents, we have more issues associated with legalizing it versus before we had legalized it? Without question.
The only people that really like the fact that we've legalized it are the people that are using it.
That's right.
Right? The physicians, the hospitals, the ERs, the therapists, the addiction treatment programs, the families, the parents, the workers, the companies that employ these people that are using, they all feel that it's catastrophic. They made a big mistake. Mm-hmm. Even the legislatures find that, hey, their highway deaths are going up, their hospitals, their costs for insurance are going up. The state is losing a lot of money. They're getting some money in, from the revenues on this marijuana, but the costs, the other costs from the legalizing marijuana are double and triple higher than the revenue coming in. You've seen this in state after state after state. In fact, at one point, Illinois was trying to legalize it, and they went and looked at Colorado, Washington State, and which they had 4 or 5 years of data, and they were looking at how much money those states were losing. They said, we're not even going to put it. We're not legalizing this, and so we have data on this now as sort of a social experiment. Mm-hmm. And again, the people that are using it are quite passionate about it. The companies that are selling it want to make money, and they're fairly passionate about it, which all gives us a lot of misinformation and half-truths on social media and all the other marketing channels and strategies, and people don't have the data to make good decisions.
So what do we have now? Over 36?
36 states that are either legalized it for recreational or medical marijuana use.
Or medical marijuana. So let's dive into that just a little bit. Differences between medical marijuana and recreational marijuana?
Great question. So when you legalize it for recreational, that means you can use it however you want. There are certain limits on where you can use it, et cetera, et cetera. Medical marijuana, in my mind, this is my own personal opinion, is a farce. Let me give you explain why. So medical marijuana is a marketing ploy in my book, because the reason you're going to use, people say, well, we have to have marijuana legalized because it's a medicine, it needs to be treated. So there's five medical diseases or illnesses for which you could use marijuana that's theoretically approved. Glaucoma, which is high pressure in your eye. Nausea, so if you have a lot of nausea, it can reduce your nausea. Increase your appetite. So if you're a cancer patient, you're in chemotherapy or HIV, you don't have an appetite, you need to eat more, you can use marijuana. And then also, some people are using it for sleep, and some people are using it to decrease anxiety. Okay, so of the two substances, CBD and THC, THC is treating the nausea, like reducing nausea. THC is increasing your appetite, and THC is doing glaucoma. So those three illnesses. It's THC. CBD is doing the sleep and the anxiety, right? So, well, then Dr. Urschel said, well, if these treat it, well, why? What's the problem? Well, the problem is if you get pure THC, you can get there's a pure THC pill. It's a pharmaceutical, approved by the FDA, paid for by insurance, called Marinol. Marinol is not addicting if you use it in appropriate quantities, and will work for your glaucoma, and will work for your nausea, and will work to increase your appetite. Not addicting, very safe substance. You can now get a pure FDA-approved CBD. It's a liquid to treat your sleep or anxiety if you need to. And so we already have these medications that we know the doses, there's no contaminants, and are not addicting, at least to our understanding so far. Why do we need this other substance that has all these other contaminants and brings a whole lot of other problems? And the other thing, remember, THC, the main problem is the potency.
Right.
Well, you already know the dose, and you can keep the dose consistent in this pill that the FDA controls. There's no federal oversight, or there's very little even state oversight on when it's legalized. And so that's the problem. So you don't need this for medical reasons. We have medicines that are of the two substances already. So when you don't know all the data I just shared with you, so we have to have it. Let's legalize it.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. And actually, as I'm listening to you, trying to be realistic here and watch this. You got 36 states that have legalized it in some form or fashion. It feels like it's, and I agree with everything that we've talked about to this day, but you can see it feels like a tidal wave that's kind of coming, and you're thinking, okay, you can't go probably back in time and reverse all the authorizations that have been allowed and all the use that's being done across our youth and older generations as well. Is there an argument to be made that a regulatory approach might be a correct approach for this? Kind of like with alcohol, a lot of regulations around its use. We don't necessarily advocate for people to go out and drink alcohol, but at least it's regulated and there's some oversight. Is there an argument to be made that creating some strict regulatory framework might help this into the future?
Well, I think you're going to have to do that. Again, I don't know all the politics involved, but in my opinion, I think that the states the states that have legalized it are not regulating it because there's not enough money to do it, not enough people, not enough manpower. And the problem with THC, obviously, is besides all these misconceptions, is the potency, the dose of the THC. So if you could go in and regulate and make sure all the commercial THC, none of it's higher than 1 or 2%, we're talking a completely different animal, right? Now, I don't know how you would get to that. The other question is, whether people legalize it because you have this whole criminal case aspect, the whole judicial aspect. There's another way to approach it in terms of decriminalization. Again, not my area of expertise, but there's a great DA here in Dallas, John Creuzot, who's trying to figure that out. There's different ways to skin the cat.
Right.
But at the end of the day, until we get to that point, we need to be outspoken that, hey, this is dangerous stuff. Please know the risks that you're taking and don't just drink the Kool-Aid. I mean, we should have a lot of credibility for this podcast. You the CEO of Enterhealth and one of the other, co-founders of Enterhealth, if we just went out and supported marijuana, right, and talked about how good it was, we'd have a lot more patients in Enterhealth. We'd be completely full. We're full most of the time anyway, but we'd be completely full. We're actually giving this information out and actually lowering the amount of our business. This is technically hurting our business, but our business is all about saving lives and helping people. So we would much rather somebody not get addicted and never come to us in the first place.
That's right.
There's still plenty of people that are going to get addicted to other substances we can help with, but in marijuana's case, if you have 36 states, if we could stop the other states from getting, the other 14 states from passing legalized, think of all the great things you're going to do in those 14 states. And then some of the states that have legalized it may walk it back or may start regulating or just don't know. It does feel like this tidal wave coming.
It does. It does.
But it doesn't stop. We're going to stop us. And every time I lecture to therapists or family members, everybody says, wow, this is such great information. Thank you for sharing with you. How are we going to now convince my son or my daughter who's using?
That's right.
It's hard.
Yeah, we have these conversations even around our house. Both of us have children that have gone through college, similarly situated. I still have son that's in high school, but I've got 2 girls that have been in college. One's still there, and I'm sure you have the same conversations with your son. And fortunately, I've been, because of the business we've been in, I've always, we've talked a lot about mental health issues, substance abuse, the things you need to be careful of. So I've tried to impart that as best I can with them. But it's interesting, when I get into the discussions, I feel like the kids still need a lot of what you and I have been talking about today, because there's still this aspect of it's really not that much different than alcohol. And I think they're seeing friends or people in sororities or other people using it with not a lot of obvious adverse consequences.
Right.
And that's, I think, a problem, because this is something, like you were talking about earlier, that's difficult to see kind of in a short period of time, but it builds. And as the brain's developing, it's not developing the way it should.
Right.
And then before you know it, you end up seeing the issues that we see in our treatment programs, which I am certain that this is absolutely underwriting so many of the psychotic issues that we've been seeing for the last handful of years.
And depression and anxiety and on top of all the social media compounded
That's right.
things. But let me just give you 2 statistics. And that is, if you start using marijuana regularly before 18, your chances of becoming addicted to it go up by 6 times, so 600%. If when a state legalizes marijuana, the addiction rate goes up in adolescents by 20% immediately.
Yeah.
So it's not like, so what happens is you legalize it, more people use it, so more people are using it, as percentage of people are getting addicted to it, and so you're just hurting a lot more people, and that's what people can't understand. There's something about marijuana, the whole conversation, in a young person that they're very defensive. If we talk about not shooting up methamphetamine or heroin, there's not going to be a lot of argument about that, or using cocaine or Quaaludes or ecstasy. They may use it, but there's not going to be any argument back against it.
That's right.
To us, even nicotine, smoking. There's going to be, but marijuana. There's something that the social media is so powerful, and the misinformation. It's this possessive. Hey, you're attacking this sacrosanct, this sacred area of my life. Back off.
That's right.
And then we as parents, or we as adults, say, okay, or that you can't answer their questions because they have this data they've been sold a certain way.
I agree.
And we're just trying to change the conversation.
We are.
We're just saying, hey, whether or not you use it or not, that's going to be your choice. Unless you're actively using it, in that case, you need to stop, get sober for a year, and then you can make a decision because your brain will be back online. But if you have a healthy brain, let's talk about the data first.
I agree.
And that's the hard thing to get.
That's right. That's right.
Luckily, it is treatable. That if we do get marijuana addiction, we can treat marijuana addiction. Luckily, we can treat alcohol addiction, cocaine. All the really tough addictions are treatable. And if you want to talk about that as we're kind of coming to a close, happy to touch base on that. But people need to know that marijuana addiction is treatable all the time. We get people off their lives. The patient's lives get better. Their family lives get better. And it is quite doable.
So let's hit on that as we go through this, because we started off talking about addiction, the complexity it's associated with it, the numerous amount of tools that you really need, I think, to combat it effectively. Right. Watching this over the last and being a part of it for the last 17 years, it is it requires a lot of different approaches to conquer this.
Right.
And in your mind, is addiction treatable? Is this something that people can get over? Because I feel like when we entered Dallas-Fort Worth and opening up a new program, I remember being interviewed by a treatment magazine, and
I remember that.
Yeah, I'll never forget. We were actually profiled in it together. Yep. We looked a lot younger back then, by the way. But I remember him saying, the dirty little secret in the treatment industry, don't you? And I said, no, I don't. He goes, nobody gets better. And that's always kind of been in my mind for the last 17, 18 years.
Right.
Well,
first of all, it really pissed us off.
It did.
It's like that kind of got us really motivated to, we're going to show that not to be true.
No doubt about it. And then we learned very quickly, I felt like, that at a macro level, I kind of understood where his comment came from.
Right.
Because we were seeing patients coming in and out of treatment programs all over the country, some of the best known,
Right.
Highly acclaimed,
Right.
that were not getting treatment.
Right.
They were getting a lot of accountability. Nothing wrong. Just for the record, with working the steps. We've talked about this over the years. But to build a central treatment program around that and not address the individual therapy issues, family systems issues, what's going on with your underlying psychiatric issues, actually diagnose this and treat this effectively. Let's do diagnostics. Let's do testing. Let's understand how this has impacted the brain. Let's put together a truly personalized treatment program for you.
Right.
That's different from me.
Right.
That's going to try to hit these goals within this time frame, and then build a follow-up continuum of care so that you can continue to build and integrate those tools so you have long-lasting recovery.
Exactly.
That's complex to do. Requires a lot of interdisciplinary work to have happen.
Right.
In your mind, looking back over this, being with me in Enterhealth, this is treatable. Would you agree?
It's very treatable because we know what the disease is. We know what the problem is. It's like if somebody has a heart attack and you don't know that the coronary arteries of the heart are the problem, and you have to go in and use a stent or use open heart bypass, or you do a variety of other tools, once you know where the problem is, then you can bring the right set of tools. Okay, we know there's a mild to moderate temporary traumatic brain injury. This is a brain issue. This is a brain injury. That's what's perpetuating all this chaos and craziness in the person's life, and the sort of slow or quick progression to lower function. And then once you understand that and you bring the right tools, like you said, sometimes you need withdrawal. Okay, so you do detox, and then most importantly, you need to find out, because if we are both alcoholics, luckily we're not in recovery, we haven't had any issues with that, but if we're both alcoholics, we'd be different people.
That's right.
Okay? And we'd be different types. It comes, every person is unique. Part of the whole point of Treatment Redefined and Psychiatry Redefined is that every person is biochemically different. Every person with depression, anxiety, manic depression, alcohol, drugs, people has those combinations, whatever. And so we have to understand what are the problem in the first place. That's one of the reasons people have gone to multiple treatment areas don't get better. They've never had the right, they really have a bipolar illness and nobody's picked up, or they have a functional problem, some vitamin deficiencies or other things that as we're integrating functional psychiatry and Enterhealth, we're finding, hey, there's all these root cause problems, these hormonal issues that nobody's even picking up on it yet.
Right. We're starting to realize that the head is actually connected to the body.
That's right.
And they interrelate with each other.
Exactly. And the whole, the brain-gut interface is real. I always was skeptical of it, but the data is in the science is just overwhelming.
That's right.
And we're seeing a lot of our patients get even better when you add that piece into it.
Agreed.
But the idea is, this is addiction. What is the problem? And then you bring the right tools. So detox can be an issue. You do the assessment. Sometimes you need a psychiatric, you'll need a psychiatric assessment. You'll need a therapist assessment. You need a family assessment. You'll need, sort of a wellness, exercise, nutrition, functional medicine assessment. You'll need a spiritual assessment. Then, that's the peer groups, friend, 12-step is great.
That's right.
Smart recovery is great. It's essential, but by itself, it was never designed to treat a mild to moderate traumatic brain injury.
That's correct.
And if you use it by itself, you have about a 25% long-term success rate. That's better than zero. Mm-hmm. But if you add all these other tools we're talking about, you have about a 95% success rate. And when it's yourself, your loved one, your coworker, your CEO, you want the best outcome in that particular case, and that's going to be a specific type of treatment plan. And you have to have a different set of tools.
That's right.
People, sometimes I use the analogy of sort of a Chinese menu. You kind of have all the tools ready and you pull in what you need for that particular situation. Now, Enterhealth is a one-stop shop. Okay, not everybody can come to Enterhealth. The key is to understand that the matrix that we use is from the National Institutes of Health. We openly plagiarized because it's out there for the public domain and said, hey, this is the problems. This is how you treat it. We said, great, we'll do that. And then we have to customize it. That's the hard part. And we have to work with patients and their families that are sometimes people use the label dysfunctional because they have their brain injured.
That's right.
And yet with the right team like we have, or wherever you go, if you go to a treatment program that's just AA based, great, take it. But no, you need to get a psychiatric evaluation. You need a family therapy. You need to get individual therapy. You need to start exercising. You need to go find a functional psychiatrist, and to get that evaluation. It's just harder, but it doesn't mean you can't do it. At least we're going to share the secret sauce of what you need to get better.
That's right.
Because just not that many people. We're a small boutique program, and people that come to us get great care and get better. But there's a lot of people that never get to us, and that's part of why we're using this medium of podcasts to get that information out.
You nailed it. I mean, that is part of the reason why we're doing this, is to have some challenging, authentic conversation around this, but spread the message that this is treatable, how you treat it, and if you live in North Dakota, New Mexico, Florida, and you hear these things, use them to your advantage to try to get better.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been an absolute pleasure to be able to spend some time with you.
Really fun.
We've been on a journey, and I love the journey part of it. It's not about the destination; it's about the journey. And I don't know that we'll ever have a destination in mind, but I sure hope that as long as Enterhealth is around, that we keep our core ethos of always trying to push the envelope on what's credible and relevant that can help our patients and families, and integrate that into the best of our ability with the best practitioners and spread the word. So I thank you so much for spending time with me today, and I look forward to continuing this journey with you.
You think about the journey, think about when we first started Enterhealth, we were really good because we had a lot of tools, but think how much better we are now at it because of all the additional tools we've added into the mix, because science continues to progress, and that's any specialty in medicine takes the latest advances, make sure they're healthy, they're safe for the patients, and can make a difference, and then integrates those two. And
That's correct.
Our patients now have the best chance of any time they've ever been in our health history to get better right now, because we have even better tools to work with.
That's right. There is not a silver bullet out there, but I'm a believer that we will give you the absolute best chance to get better.
Right.
We got the prescription. Come in, work with us, and you have a chance of having a very fulfilling quality life.
Great.
Hey, it was a pleasure. Enjoyed it.
Thanks for inviting me.
You got it.